Okay, welcome everybody to the US presidential election in perspective, lively debate with experts and the Colombia alumni. We're just waiting for a few people to jump onto the call, so we'll start in the next couple of minutes. Just to give you a lay of the land, I'll make a couple opening remarks. I'll hand the floor over to our co-host, and then I'll make a short introduction of our speakers. You'll hear a bit from them, and then we'll have an opportunity for a lively discussion amongst everybody on the call. So we'll start in the next minute or two.
If someone, oh, Jose, hi, thank you for joining, actually. Diana, I'm sorry, if you prefer to start networking right now, pre-networking until everyone is joining, please feel free to do. And we have our chat. You always can say hi and say from where you are joining. And let me actually introduce our two alumni here. One is Diana Wade, who did a bachelor and master at Colombia and currently doing her PhD at Bocconi on intellectual law trade. But I will pass to you, Diana, that you can tell about yourself or like introduce yourself. And here is Jose Negrete, who is currently at Washington, DC, and will join us in next spring or next year at Italy in Rome. And Jose did also science at undergrad, Columbia College, 2005. Astrophysics, by the way, the same. And yeah, and Jose, you know Marcel already, who put you in contact with Embassy and ICAR, American Club. And let me introduce also, yeah, that's all. If you want to unmute yourself and start introducing actually, until everyone's joining.
Okay, yeah, I'll go. Hi, so I'm Diana, and it's nice to participate. And as Selby mentioned, I
hear you. I'm sorry.
I'm
Diana, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Or, okay, you're unmuted, but I still cannot hear.
Hello? Can you hear?
Yeah.
Can anyone hear Diana?
Yes, yes.
Okay, it's only we cannot hear. Okay.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, just checking
Ray, hi.
what's going on.
I could hear Diana as well.
Hi, yes, hi, nice to meet you. And I'm happy to participate in this event, especially being, an American in Italy. This is a way to connect also back to the United States. So as Selby mentioned, I'm studying international trade law at the Bocconi in Milan. So, anyways, I hope we have a good discussion.
Good.
So I think we'll kick it off now. Most of our attendees have arrived in the call. So my name is Matthew Robinson. I'm Managing Director of the Eurogulf Information Center here in Rome. On the occasion of the US presidential election 2020, we decided to partner with our very good friends at the Colombia Alumni Association in Italy to invite an esteemed panel of speakers with expertise across their different fields. In attendance, we have people across the Columbia Alumni Network and other Ivy League universities in the US, amongst friends of our organization and other political leaders that I'm sure will join us in our discussion period after the speakers have had their say. So I will hand the floor over now for the president of the Columbia Alumni Association, Selby, to say a very brief introduction, and then I will introduce our speakers, and we will go from there. Selby, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Buongiorno, buonasera, depending from where you're joining. So exactly. It's really great to have you. And my name is Selby Bashimba. I'm president of Columbia Alumni Association of Italy, also known as CA Italy. And thank you for actually joining us. I know you are overwhelmed with historic event and dates and other events. And I also wanted to say thank you for Eurogulf Information Center for organizing this event from A to Z, and actually Matthew Robinson, Managing Director of EGIC, who is pulling all his network to this event. So please join, please, if you have any questions about Eurogulf, about if you would like to talk with your guest speakers directly, bring your questions. And yeah, let's start. Thank you, and that's all. Sorry. I see there's several Selby Bashimva. Can you actually rename yourself, please? I know that you are our alumni, and I will appreciate if you will write at least the name and school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Selby. So I will start by introducing a handful of our speakers, and then I will give the floor. So we have, first of all, we have Dick Roche. Dick is a former Irish Fianna Fáil politician. He served as Minister of State for European Affairs between 2002 and 2004 and 2007 and 2011. He also served as Minister for the Environment, Heritage and Local Government in Ireland between 2004 and 2007. He's an advisor of the consultancy collective The Skill Set based in London. He's received numerous awards and recognitions from presidents of France and Estonia, as well as the United Nations. He's a graduate of the University College Dublin and holds a DPA, Bachelor of Commerce degree and a Master's degree in Public Administration. We also have William Spencer. Spence is the Executive Director of the Institute for International Law and Human Rights. Spencer has more than 24 years of professional experience in diplomacy, human rights, democracy and governance, international law and crisis management and response, both as a diplomat and an advocate in the field. He's familiar with post-conflict rebuilding and peace and constitutional negotiations in former Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. In 1996, Spence helped to configure Bosnia's first post-war elections and oversaw the implementation of human rights components of the General Framework Agreement for Peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As a career Foreign Service officer within the US State Department, Spence served as a senior deputy officer in the White House Situation Room, supported transatlantic institutions such as NATO and the OSCE. We also have Marcel Kaminstein. He's the chair of the pro-business PAC and director of the Italian-American Trade Council, also a board member of the American Club in Rome, and president of Media Lab Group. Marcel has been a long-time advocate of international trade, facilitating cross-partnerships for advanced diplomatic initiatives and democratic pro-business initiatives through Diplo Rome initiatives, the Bloomberg 2020 presidential campaign, and the Pennsylvania State Representative 156th District special election race. We also have David Campbell Bannerman. David is a leading British political commentator, writer, and communication strategist. As elected member of the European Parliament for the East of England between 2009 and 2019, David is a prominent Brexiteer, so for over 10 years on the International Trade Committee, working on trade deals with Canada, as known as CETA, India, as the Parliament's standing rapporteur, New Zealand, Colombia, Peru, the USA, Australia, and Japan. He's proposed a SuperCanada UK EU trade deal, which has subsequently been quoted by the sitting UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and is an honorary member of the European Research Group, otherwise known as the ERG. And David has also chaired the pro-Brexit organization's contact groups for vote leave in the 2016 EU referendum. David has extensive knowledge of foreign affairs and served as chairman of the European Parliament's Iraq delegation while serving in the European Parliament. David's also worked on the Northern Ireland peace process as a special advisor under the then Secretary of State, Sir Patrick Mayhew, and worked closely with American representatives in the process, such as Senator George Mitchell. David has a master's honours degree from the University of Edinburgh, also my alma mater, and had an exchange scholarship at the Wharton Business School of Pennsylvania. So on that note, I will first give the floor to Dick Roche, who will kick off our conversation. Dick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Matthew. It was very good to see David there. Lovely to meet everybody. Many, many years ago, I spent a human rights fellowship in the United States. And I was extremely lucky in that the Bar Association, who organized it, in order to make sure that I had access around the Capitol buildings, attached me to Tip O'Neill's office for a short time. And I remember very well that one of the staff there said to me, when I asked him about politics, he told me that politics was the best fun you could have with your clothes on. So certainly politics at the moment in the United States is exciting, it's gripping. By any objective standard, the president should not be in a position where he could possibly win because of the polling numbers. But it does strike me that there are still a chance, albeit a slightly remote chance, of his producing what would be the greatest comeback since Lazarus. I have two concerns, I have to say, about the election campaign in the United States at the moment. I'm very, very, very disturbed by the lack of civility in the campaigning. I think that's a tragedy. But more importantly, I'm concerned at the lack of international observers. I remember many years ago, I was an observer during the Nicaraguan elections when Violeta Chamorro beat Ortega. And the difference between there being bloodshed that night when the results came true and there being relative calm was the presence of Jimmy Carter and his team. They handled the way the voting counting was being done with astonishing skill. And it's a pity that those skills aren't going to be present. I'm also a little concerned, and you know this, Matthew, from things that I've written, about the very rapid move into vote by mail. I think it leaves the way open for a lot of challenges. My earnest and neutral wish from today and tomorrow and the next 3 or 4 days is that we will actually have a clear-cut result in the United States, and that the American democracy, which is taking a lot of battering over the last 12 months, can start to fix itself. I don't think anybody on any side of the planet, anybody who has any sense of history, would want to see this being a contested election. I think the results are going to be fascinating. I'll certainly be watching Pennsylvania and Florida very, very closely. And in fact, the other states that Trump took last time and that he has to win. But it's going to be an astonishing night, given the extraordinary turnout by the American people, which goes to show, if you look at the preliminary figures, that whatever about the contestants in the election, the American people are wed to the idea of democracy. And please God, democracy will pay dividends, and we'll see some civility coming back into American politics after this. I'll hand back over to you at that, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Dick. And now we'll hand turn the floor over to William Spencer. Spence, the floor is yours.
Hi, I of course want to thank all of y'all for organizing this event and reporting from Washington, D.C. It is calm but tense, as they like to say. It is, I think there's a lot of pent-up exuberance about the expectations. And if there's anything I want to say, and to echo Dick's comments, 100 million Americans have already voted. And that is something that is astounding. You have 116% of the total turnout for the state of Texas. And that's going to have a lot of down ballot issues. I wanted to stress this. I was talking to Dick before the meeting, and it can, for example, affect the Texas state legislature. And of course, the Senate is in play. And the Senate is a critical aspect to this that we also need to, you know, and all the exuberance about Trump and Biden. We need to recognize that if the Democrats were able to capture the Senate, that would be an amazing thing, and it could even lead to Democratic control of the House and the Senate and the executive. So that is what I want to share. The other thing too I want to say is in answer to Dick's comment about election observation, the OSCE, the Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, which is headquartered in Warsaw, has fielded a really stripped down 30-member delegation that is fanned out across the United States. And the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly has 59 lawmakers who have also traveled across the Atlantic to observe the elections. They released an election report for the period up. They released it a couple of days ago, actually, and that report complained a lot about the undermining of the elections and a lot of the statements that had been made by Trump about mail-in ballots and alleged fraud. I'll just leave it at that. But you know, by 3:00 a.m. Rome time, we might have the beginnings of clarity on what is probably going to be a very long and drawn-out process, as somebody said, lengthy and vicious for the next few weeks. And we have to recognize that as being in the cards. By 9:00 p.m. Eastern time, we're probably going to see most of the Texas, for example, closes at 8. Florida and Georgia and North Carolina, of course, will all be closed. But by 9:00, we're probably going to be able to see the first indications of whether or not Trump is able to hold off this massive onslaught. And I think that's pretty much it. I mean, he's got to beat the polls. There's got to be a error in polling beyond what happened in 2016. So, you know, this is, and we'll be able to see that probably by 3 o'clock in the morning Rome time. So I hope everybody's going to stay up for that. Finally, I just want to close. I started doing all this thinking about what to say about the elections and all this doom and gloom. And I just wanted to call everybody's attention to America, a survey that the Chicago Council on Global Affairs put out. And it's a survey of American public opinion on US foreign policy. And I want to remind everybody that for all of the polarization and all of the dissonance that you're getting from the United States, the folks at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs did a huge stem to stern annual survey. 68% of all Americans, including all parties, support taking an active role, which is actually higher than the Cold War right now. And support for NATO stands at 73%. 6 in 10 want to build stronger alliances in the Middle East. And here's my favorite little nugget. 71% believe the US should consult allies before making decisions, even if Washington needs to agree to policies that are not its first choice. How refreshing. So I just wanted to sort of throw that out there for everyone. Basically, you know, despite what all the static and all the background noise, America has not turned inward, at least at the moment. And regardless of whoever wins this evening or in the coming weeks, that will still stand.
Thanks a lot, Spencer. And just my observations there, and you made with you and Dick made comments about early voting. I think as things stand currently, I think we have nearly 65% of the total amount of people that voted 4 years ago have already voted. So we're potentially looking at if turnout holds as people are voting right now, there could be a turnout that hasn't been seen in proportion in modern American history. It could be absolutely historic. Traditionally, obviously, larger turnout has favored the Democrats. I know Trump is expecting to win on the day in some states, but if Biden's early voting is to such an extent and so huge, you wonder, just looking at the numbers, how Trump is going to overcome that. Also with how he's trading currently within states like Wisconsin and Michigan, where Biden's lead is well outside of the margin of error. So my observation, I think the record levels of early voting also coupled with over the last 2 months, Biden has traditionally been polling over 50%. And while Clinton 4 years ago consistently led Trump in the months coming up to the election, she never got to that 50% threshold. So I think that is a difference versus 4 years ago, that there are not as many undecideds at this point. And it would seem Biden has consistently managed to keep over that 50%. So either the polls are wrong in some of these swing states, or Trump is trying to potentially peel away some previously committed Biden voters on election day. It would seem like quite a difficult amount for the Trump campaign to overcome. Saying that, no one thought he could win 4 years ago. On the U.S. on the Senate election, we see the Democrats are going to hold on to the House of Representatives, but I've noticed a tightening in the polls in the U.S. Senate elections in Arizona and Iowa, especially, where the Democratic candidates were just a few weeks ago somewhat comfortably ahead. Now their leads are definitely within the margin of error. And you've seen that also complemented in the US presidential election, where Trump is now far more competitive in Arizona and Iowa than he perhaps was a few weeks ago. So those are just some of my observations. I'm not going any further on that point. I'll hand the floor over now to Marcel, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate, first off, the invitation. Thank you, Selby. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you to CAA and Eurogolf. It's a pleasure to be able to jump on the panel with William and Dick. Fascinating backgrounds. It's interesting to build on a little bit of what they were speaking about before. This is an election like probably none other than we're going to have for the rest of our lives, or for even our parents' lives. Our grandparents probably saw something similar. If you looked at the 1876 election, where the Republican Hayes won that election, there was an 82% voter rate. And that is quite high. That is about 20 points higher than most of the elections that we have in the United States. We usually float between 50 and 60% towards the high end. We've already got almost 65% of voters that have come out and already voted via mail-in ballots, which is incredible. You know, if you look at it, and it's really going to boil down to a few states as to who's going to win this election. And if you look at some of the data, a lot of the data, it kind of paints a really big picture towards the Democrats winning this election. But there's a lot of data that hasn't come out to the to the forefront, which is, there's a huge silent Trump voter block. Now, these are people that are, they are quietly, just waiting till the election day, till today, that they're going to go out to the polls. They're not really telling anybody who they're going to vote for or who they're not going to vote for. A lot of these polls, a lot of the polling happens by telephone call. Some of it has also shifted towards emails. So you get these interactions with people, but a lot of that is very skewed. Now, if you look at the Pennsylvania, which is, I'm actually in Chester County. So I am in one of the heaviest contested areas that is now leaning towards the Democratic side. And most of those, there's been, let's just say Pennsylvania by itself, 65% of the Democrats have already placed their vote via mail-in ballot. You've got then, the Republicans who have about 24%, but most of the Republicans are going to go out and vote today in person. And I can tell you from this morning, there were a lot of people at the polls. There was just right down the street from my house, we had probably about 25 to 30 people in line waiting to vote. And I would probably venture to guess that most of those would have been Republican voters. So you have this dynamic that I'm not sure if it's going to be contested. I personally think that the Dems will win this election. I think by the time the polls close, we're probably going to know who won. I do believe that there is going to be a legal contesting of the votes. I think that we're going to have a lot of lawsuits have already come up through the courts very quickly, have gone up to the Supreme Court, have come up to the state courts. And I know that the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, just one example, he's ready for a fight for what's going to happen tomorrow, because tomorrow morning there's going to be a number of legal cases that will be submitted to contest the votes that are coming in, because what's really happening, and this is going to be the biggest challenge, let's say, to our constitutional way of voting, which is mostly entirely by law. It's a state issue, but we're going to see this tomorrow morning. We're going to see these lawsuits come up, and we'll see what the courts say about them. But the main thing that they're trying to do is they're trying to cancel any of those votes that have come in after the polls close today. They do not want to count them. What is going to end up happening is that's going to go to court and see, do we keep those or do we not keep those? So that is something you should definitely watch for. Another thing to watch for that's very interesting is that, in 1960, when we had JFK versus Richard Nixon, we had a 70% voter turnout, and we are already almost at that 70%. We're at 65% already that have voted via mail-in ballot, and we still have all of today's votes to count for. So I think a lot of the doom and gloom, about what's happening with the American democracy. I think American democracy is thriving. I think that we couldn't see a better show of democratic values. I think that there's a lot of question marks around, whether the mail-in ballots are something that is fraught with voter fraud, and I believe it's not. And I have been very close to some of the leadership here locally. And one of the things that have come out every time that I've asked these committees, how is the voting going? What's going on? They all come back to me and they say, you know what, it's going absolutely almost flawless. There's a lot of people involved, Republicans and Democrats, everybody gets together and everybody takes the idea of voting in a democracy in America very, very seriously on both sides. So I'm going to yield back the floor.
Thank you very much, Marcel. And I know that is a concern of a lot of people, that there's a potential for a Bush v. Gore style 2000 situation, but beyond the hanging chad in Florida, you could have lawyers at various courthouses in Pennsylvania and Arizona and Michigan, even in New Hampshire. I mean, it could be chaotic on historic levels, and that's before you even get to potentially tightly contested Senate and House races, or potential runoffs in Georgia in early January. The Americans could be entering potentially one of the most constitutionally chaotic periods in modern history. I hope, for the sake of my American friends, the president, and not that's not the case, but ultimately the democratic process and the legal process will have to play out. On that note, I will hand the floor over now to David Campbell Bannerman, who's with us in person in Rome. And David, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Matthew, and to Mitchell and EGIC for getting me to Rome. All roads lead to Rome, even with COVID, it appears. Thank you. It's a very interesting event, and I'd like to thank Colombia as well for co-hosting this. I have visited Colombia in my time. I was actually a student at Wharton, and in between the various Trumps and Wharton, I miss them. But of course, Philadelphia is a great city, and as a pro-Brexiteer, I've often gone on about our own Declaration of Independence, from the European Union. So I have to just report on, we're talking about Pennsylvania, that there was the ultimate poll today, which was the Pennsylvania cookie poll, which predicted the last three elections accurately. It actually had one Biden cookie for every 6 Trump cookies. So I don't know that as a giveaway as to where we're heading. I don't know. We'll find out. Hopefully we'll find out tonight. I thought I'd just touch on, firstly, on Britain and the UK, then go to the EU, and then on foreign affairs, if I may. From the British point of view, clearly, I think none of us who are non-Americans want to interfere in the US elections. I mean, President Obama, if you remember, came over during the EU referendum, the Brexit referendum, and said that Britain would be at the back of the queue, which was meant to sort of kill the campaign for Brexit, but actually the polling went up for Brexit after his intervention, so it rather backfired. And so it's probably a bad idea to interfere in other people's elections. But obviously it's down to US voters. I just wanted I had a few personal observations based on my experience of the United States. And that is, firstly, that Biden is far more pro-EU than Trump. I think that's a pretty proven fact. And he has said a number of times he'll prioritise EU over the UK, the independent UK. We actually leave the end of this year in full from the single market, etc. I would just point out, this is probably historically unwise, because in 1792, when we got over the nasty business of losing America, we actually, Britain amazed the leaders of the of your revolution. We offered a very generous trade deal, and we've just moved on from there. And actually, Benjamin Franklin's one of my heroes. He was absolutely stunned by it. But it just goes to show, once the politics out of the way, then you should move on to trade and have very good trading relations. I'm afraid the EU has not taken that advice, and we've had, we're pretty close to having a no deal situation, but I hope we do get a deal with the EU. It's better for everyone, personally. And I have suggested SuperCanada based on the Canadian deal with the EU. I think what's very interesting, Trump has offered the UK a very advantageous trade deal. And we're actually at the 5th round at the moment of negotiations. So this is real and it's moving forward. And I had meetings in Washington when I was over there just over 2 years ago. And there's a lot of potential in that, obviously for the United States as well. We're a big market, a big consumer, and the US, like, the beef and pork market, actually, we're a very small, or the US has a very small proportion of that market at the moment. We've had a direct threat from Biden and Nancy Pelosi, who I met in London when she came over, that, if we don't respect the Good Friday Agreement over the border, then they will hold up the trade deal. They won't get through. I'm a bit concerned about this because I actually worked on the peace process, 96, 97. I was standing behind the Prime Ministers when it started. And if you read the Good Friday Agreement, it doesn't even mention the border. There is no mention of the border. There's a bit on security, but not actually the border for pretty obvious reasons. So it isn't a very good reason to hold up a major trade deal or benefit to everyone. So I think that is a concern, and that is quite a big difference between the two camps. I would say that it is better than the current situation where there's a trade war between the EU and the US. I mean, it's tragic that the Americans are having to pay 25% more for their Scotch whiskey. That I really feel for you. And obviously it's potentially hitting cars, etc. It's all to do with the Airbus and Boeing dispute. But we want to get beyond that, and I think the UK could get a great trade deal, whereas the EU one, TTIP, unfortunately failed. I'm in favour of it, but it did fail. It is a bit of a contrast. I think on the defence side, Britain, an independent Britain, is already ramping up defence, and we're working with there's been some joint exercises flying over me in the east of England, actually, from RAF Marham and the American base at Lakenheath, etc. There's been a fantastic cooperation between our two forces through NATO, and we have actually a joint F-35 Lightning group on board our carrier, so they're working hand in glove. And it does shows the potential we have. And also we have common threats, such as Chinese aggression towards Taiwan or around the Far East. And I think you'll find that an enlightened Britain, or as a liberated Britain, will actually be far more willing to work closely with America on foreign policy initiatives such as that. I would say, you've got issues such as climate change targets, the Paris Agreement. The EU is far more in favour of all that. So a Biden win would mean that, that the EU and the US would be far more in step, rightly or wrongly, over such initiatives. And of course, its agenda is more sort of in favour of BLM and it's more socialist in many ways. And we shouldn't forget the EU has actually helped sponsor Hezbollah activities, some of their charitable, inverted commas, activities, and is instinctively more anti-American. So I think that shift will not be positive for the States in many ways, but as I say, we keep out the election. I just want then to talk about foreign affairs particularly, but it's the first thing to say relevant between EU and foreign affairs is about the Iran deal. And this is another huge difference, whereas the Democrats, I think, will sign back up to the Iran deal, whereas President Trump did this. He ripped up the rotten nuclear deal. He called it decaying and rotten, with the people that he called the greatest sponsors of terror in the world, that is Iran. And actually, I salute him on that, because my experience as chairman of the Iraq delegation, you know, firsthand, been over there, met the Peshmerga, met victims of ISIS crimes, cities, sex slaves, etc. You know, the Iranian militia have taken control of large parts of Iraq. They've destabilized the government, and that is very concerning. And I think he's absolutely right. And what this Iran deal did was liberate $100 billion or more of frozen assets, some of which has gone towards funding terrorism. So I don't think it was a good way forward. I think he was right on what he did, and Israel, of course, was very supportive of that. And I'm afraid what this is about is the EU as a superstate wanting to drive a world agenda, and it was actually allowed to take the lead on the Iran deal, and is still trying to hold on to it. But of course, the reality is that with American sanctions, a lot of companies have pulled out, European companies have pulled out, because they'd rather trade with the United States than Iran. So I think that is quite a, you know, that could be quite a major change. And as I say, my experience is seeing them in Yemen, providing missiles to the Houthi rebels, which have been fired at Riyadh airport, and God knows what would happen if an airliner got hit. Could be American, could be British. They are active all around the Gulf. They're destabilizing Bahrain, with terrorists being sent over with motorboats. They're in Syria and Lebanon. The Hezbollah has been well backed, and they have 30,000 missiles. I was on the border of Israel with an Israeli general, 30,000 sophisticated missiles. They're no longer kind of sort of Blue Peter string and a bit of firework attached. They're very sophisticated missiles, and that was very serious. You know, so there's a real threat there, and I really think that is a great concern, you know, from a different foreign affairs approach. Just to wind up then, I would commend President Trump for being a peacemaker. You know, it is amazing, this normalization agenda. You've had the UAE basically doing a deal with Israel, followed by Bahrain. Sudan has done one now, and there's others in the pipeline. Morocco has been mentioned. And this is very benign for the world. And, you know, President Trump did not take the opportunity to bomb Iran because of the potential loss of life, but he did have Soleimani, who is the sort of strategist, the main strategist behind destabilizing the Middle East. And also Europe. You know, there's evidence of potential attacks in Paris being frustrated, and elsewhere around Europe. So it's not just a Middle East issue. I would just say, you know, I'm in favor of a two-state solution. It doesn't rule it out, you know, moving the US embassy to Jerusalem. But I do think it's actually given the opportunities for peace a big push forward, actually. And that is certainly the experience I had on the Northern Ireland peace process, was you have to respect two different traditions. And it's not a zero-sum game where, you know, if one side gets something, the other side loses it. So that is broadly sort of some of the issues that I think come out of this. I think it's going to be a fascinating night. I really hope that whatever happens, the lawyers don't win. Sorry if there's lawyers there, but, you know, this could be a hanging Chad, you know, 2000 situation where we don't know the result for weeks or longer. I worry about what could happen with regard to law and order on the streets. I really hope, as Dick quite rightly, as a great Democrat, Dick, has said, we've got to avoid violence and return to democracy. So very happy to take questions, but I hope that was of interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for the intervention. And I'll use my discretion as moderator to kick us off with the first question to all our panelists. Hopefully, after we have a result, and hopefully it will come within hours, not days, weeks, and months, we will potentially be looking at a Trump second term or a first Biden-Harris administration. As it relates to the potential cabinet and incoming transition team, or if Trump is re-elected, there'll be less of a transition. Who would our panelists speculate would be on the short list for roles such as Secretary of State, Ambassador to the United Nations? And if you don't have suggestions for any names, what would you anticipate and suggest would be top on the agenda from January 20th onwards for either candidate? Would anybody particularly like to tackle that first? Spence, would you? Yeah, floor is yours.
Susan Rice with a bullet. I think Susan Rice is probably going to be. She's the leading candidate for Secretary of State. Michelle Flournoy for Secretary of Defense.
Sorry, Dick, would you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think Susan Rice would actually be a very, very good choice. You know, I have a strange thing to suggest, and it's this. You know, I would love to see Barack Obama. I know it's not a tradition, but I'd love to see Barack Obama playing, if there is a new Democratic administration, Barack Obama coming in to play a role at world level. And I'll explain why. I've only met him twice. And I've found him to be a person of unusual, there's unusual qualities there. And I think the last 4 years has done a lot of damage to the US place in the world. I'm not blaming anybody for that, but I think that the infighting hasn't helped that. So I'd very much like to see that happening. Myself and David could talk all night. David is probably my best friend in politics, and we disagree on just about everything. It's wonderful. He is the most wonderful person to have a discussion with, because even when he's desperately wrong, he keeps his good humor up. And it would be wonderful if all political discourse could have the civility that he brings to it. Can I just ask Marcel? Can I ask a question, Marcel? Just on the issue of vote by mail, my concern is not that it's all fraudulent. I don't agree with that, but my concern is if you actually look at some of the things. Look at, for example, the experiments in the UK with all mail elections. They produce some absolutely awful examples of fraud. Where particularly in minority communities, they were played on by what you call in America ballot harvesting criminals. And you even saw this in the North Carolina congressional race in 2018. So even tiny amounts, this is the problem I have with vote by mail. And I should say, when I was minister, I was responsible for for how elections were run in Ireland. And I had to retire all of our electronic voting machines because Irish people didn't have confidence in them. There's no evidence that they were fraudulent, but the lack of confidence. And I just worry about that it could be the trigger. I mentioned before we started, myself and William were having a chat. I mentioned before we started, I saw a disturbing thing that was on some video clip that was being shown, undoubtedly by the right, but people not being allowed in to verify the counting in parts of Pennsylvania. And I get terribly worried about that, because, and Marcel, you're absolutely correct. The most extraordinary example of people's faith in democracy is the American people going out 100 million, William was saying, 100 million before the actual voting day. That's an astonishing example of how much faith people have in democracy. And I just pray that nothing will happen over the coming days. Nothing will happen over the coming days to undermine that confidence and that belief. Because if that belief is destroyed, it's very, very hard to build it back up again.
So I totally agree with you. And there's actually been, I think, the concerns are valid, and there have been issues with the voter election process and some specific targeted issues. There was an example in California where they were putting up a fake box that was receiving ballots, but those are a lot of, there's so many eyeballs that are out there right now, and they are looking at every voting place. They're looking at every box. People in the community are getting very involved in just the election process itself. You've got a whole number of people that, they come out just to poll watchers. They just come out just to be eyeballs, to make sure that people are voting and that there's no suspected, voter fraud. If anybody comes into the ballot and their signature is totally different than the regular signature that they have on file, they can bring up those ideas. And there are small committees that are both represented by both Republicans and Democrats at every single polling place. And you've got a lot of attorneys that come out and they volunteer their time to make sure and ensure that laws and rules and regulations are being followed. And it's amazing when you actually go out to those polling places and you see it. Now, I think a lot of the concern ends up stemming from some of those inner city voting places where you have a lower socioeconomic level, and that's where most of those things happen. Like you were saying, the voter harvesting, and those things have come up over and over again. And a lot of times, what happens is you have teams of attorneys that go after every single one of those cases. There are an enormous number of these. They are nonprofit groups that specifically go after every single one of these cases that pop up. They send attorneys to go look at it. They really get involved, and they do it aggressively and quickly. And the judges prioritize and have prioritized those issues first and foremost above all else, to make sure and ensure that everybody in America has really the confidence in the voting. And when there's issues, it goes in front of a judge, and the judge, rules one way or another. Some people have been disappointed on the Republican side, even with the Republican Supreme Court justices that have been put in place under the Trump administration. There's been a lot of these very specific pointed questions on mail-in ballots that were raised by the Republicans and have ultimately been shot down. Now, there's a couple of very interesting cases that will be heard tomorrow morning by the Supreme Court, which are in relation to various states in whether they can accept those ballots on after the polls close, even though they were mailed in. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it happens. I personally don't think we're going to see a whole lot of violence at the polls. I don't think that there's going to be, I think there is more violence that's happening in America as really just it's kind of like a bubbling up of cultural issues that have been, haven't really been addressed. I mean, if you look at the whole Black Lives Matter, and you look at, really the tearing apart of the fabric of America, it's really that there's these cultural issues that are coming to the forefront. And, just to give everybody a perspective of the direction that America is currently going in 2024, which is, it's 20 plus years away from us right now. We're looking at a minority white population, or a potential minority white population, because we're going to have so many other, Asian Americans, African Americans, we're going to have all of these populations that may actually make up a greater portion than the white part of the population. So there's these huge cultural things that keep coming up. And I think you saw it in Black Lives Matter, but then this was something that's been happening since the 1960s. There was a really fascinating thing that I'm sure probably not many people know, but I believe it was in Alabama. They just finished voting down having a Confederate flag in the state flag, which couldn't even believe that this is even happening in the 2000s, but it is. So, there's a lot of unaddressed issues, but they're bubbling their way up. The people are coming out, they're amassing. You're seeing Black Lives Matters. You're seeing a lot of white people that are coming out in support of Black Lives Matters, which is fantastic. And I think that is a big change from something that's happened in the past. So let's hope that, a lot of these issues get resolved in terms of the ballots, and we continue to have a steadfast, support of our democracy.
If I could cut in really briefly, one thing that we have not mentioned, that Marcel and Dick, you're talking about this voting by mail. One word we haven't said all evening is COVID. And let's be clear that there are a lot of trade-offs. Secretaries of State in all 50 states have all said, they're not willing to adapt to a full vote by mail regime, and they're doing the best they can. But we as a country assume a certain level of risk by trying to accommodate this in light of COVID-19. And so, we sort of talk like it's this abstract thing, but in fact, this is about saving lives, and this is a conscious choice that people have made.
I think, sorry, William, I agree 100% with you. This debate, I actually did a paper earlier on where we looked at this debate around the world, because it wasn't just happening in America. And I think the response that they had in New Zealand was so interesting, because they actually adopted your early voting, they extended the voting. I think that was a very intelligent approach. And I'm actually very happy with the way the voting arrangements have been extended in the US. I just hope that we're not going to have the kind of issues that have shown themselves. I do worry. I'll send you my paper because I actually worry about how particularly the inner city socioeconomic people are preyed on. They're preyed on. This happened in Birmingham in the UK. It happened in Tower Hamlets in the UK. It happened in Slough in the UK. It happened in Burnley. And the UK had a very interesting experience when they came. And in 2.5 years, or after only 3 years rather, they abandoned the all-mail voting, specifically because it had undermined confidence, not because the system wouldn't work, but because people had lost confidence. I'll send you both, yourself and I think it would be really interesting for us to get our heads together after this and look backwards on this.
So one of what you just touched on, one of the things that that I believe was happening in Poland and has been happening very successfully is the fact that they were able to vote digitally. They've created a digital relationship. I believe it was Poland that this is happening, but they've developed Estonia. I'm sorry, Estonia has developed a very good system of developing a digital relationship with the state. This is something that really is relatively a new idea and a new concept that has been very difficult to, let's say, get the general population to swallow. One of the things that I ran just a couple of months ago, I ran unsuccessfully, but with great education for my political self. I ran for Pennsylvania State Rep of the 156th District. And one of the things that I had run on in terms of a platform was really to create digital relationship with the state so that instead of having really, one of the things that a huge challenge that happened in the United States that people have been up in arms about is unemployment benefits. So unemployment benefits in the United States have been a disaster. To get, all of a sudden when COVID hit and we shut down, there were millions and millions of people that all of a sudden became unemployed from one day to the next with very little savings. So it took months. It took some people 3 months, 4 months to end up getting into the system and getting those benefits put out to every single person. So one of the things that I've been a big champion for and something that Europe has spearheaded is having that digital relationship with government. And I think once we get to the point where we've we've arrived, like as a perfect example is how we bank today. We go in, we log in online, and we're able to bank confidently in knowing that our money isn't going to disappear, and able to go into the branch and be able to take care of certain procedures that end up allowing us to feel comfortable and safe. The reason is because we've got multiple layers of cybersecurity, two-step authentication. If we can do the same thing with the digital relationship with our state, we could actually vote online, and I think we'll have above 90% participation in voting. But today we're still at 70, and we're still on the paper trail. So.
Thank you, Marcel. I'll bring in.
It was just actually very interesting what you say, Marcel, but I don't want, digital worries me in many ways. If people turn up, you could identify them, or you should be able to identify them. Dick has a great point that in Britain, I'm afraid, postal vote has been totally misused. And certain communities, just basically collect ballot papers and then vote for people. It's shameful, and the government is on the case. I know the minister is responsible, but Dick has a very good point there. An in-mail can be corrupted, and I think just turning up, it should be a civic duty to turn up and vote, and it is very encouraging, the massive turnout we're seeing in the United States. British turnout is normally about 70% anyway, but it's great to see, and you got that in the Brexit referendum. People who've never voted, actually, in their 40s, even have to be shown how to vote. So it can happen if the motivation is good enough. Just on BLM, it's not that Black Lives Matters, but clearly that the message is absolutely right. But it's what does this organisation do? In Britain now, BLM is now a different political party. It's just registered in the last week, and one of its aims is defunding the police and letting out criminals from jails and things. And it's like, to me, it's been hijacked. A good cause has been hijacked by a hard communist body organisation. Which has a different agenda. I don't think it actually cares about race. It wants to bring down the state, and it's tied into tearing down statues of people like in the States or Columbus. It's actually about tearing down our values and our history, and it's happening in Britain. It's happening all over the place, and that to me is very, very dangerous. I hope that hard left doesn't hijack any sort of problems with this election, in terms of voting. I think just going back to the question, that the only person I was curious to know would getting a place if Biden wins is Bernie Sanders, because I think he wants a place, a second state place, and it'd be very interesting if he's brought in what that means in terms of a shift to the left or not. Or whether that's credible or not, I can't really comment, but I found that the most interesting in terms of putting together a cabinet. Thank you.
Also, just to add to Matthew's original question, another little gossipy thing: Pete Buttigieg for United Nations ambassador. Now you know.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
I do know Bernie Sanders has been moved as a potential secretary, I think, for Labour under a Biden administration.
Yeah, that would fit.
Yeah, it could be difficult for him to get through the Senate. I'll open the floor to further questions. I'd be remiss not to invite one of our in-person guests, which is quite rare in these COVID COVID day and age. Alessandro Politi is the director of the NATO Defence College Foundation here in Rome, and a good friend of EGIC. Alessandro, would you like to make a contribution?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the kind invitation. It is quite interesting to participate with the sort of, how can I say, guessing and hoping exercises that happen in these nights. My first thought is, when you like or dislike a president, please treat him like a flu symptom. Why? Because so you avoid to be engrossed with the personality, no matter if it's Obama or Trump. and you look more at specific things that probably you dislike, but that are factual. I would like to say treat her, but for the moment it's quite improbable. If I can tell you something about my experience as not a politician, unfortunately, but surely as somebody who has advised, I have still, a quite good opinion of politicians, despite having a very good Scottish friend saying, why do you contact the lowly forms of life? So, but he was a military, so I don't like unprofessional people. The problem is, I don't like unprofessional people who don't learn on the job. Putin, who is certainly not a saint, did it. And some other people, like also in my country, persistently don't. Why? Because it is a very demanding job, and you have a responsibility for millions of people, literally. I have heard, the introduction, which is absolutely charming, and I understand, the passion, the civic passion, the political passion. Let me add, a sort of Italian, more dry Machiavellian streak. I have a dim view of pseudo-revolutionaries. In Germany, they are called Revoluzers, but generally, they are conservative Catilinarians. Now, I speak as at least an adoptive Roman. A lot of Romans are adoptive indeed. Catilina was a professional, but Caesar was more professional. And Catilinarians don't want to change the world. They want just to sit in the Senate and do their own business. So no, I'm not enthused, but the important thing is to go beyond personalities. I understand very well the details of what you have said. My problem is that an order has ended. And I really think, about the end, of the Roman Empire, for instance. What do you do? Now you have different choices. One of the choices is to divide the empire into more management units. It happened with the Habsburgs. Charles V, who was a real professional polyglot, always winning, but forced to divide the empire. The other thing is to have a sort of grand compromise, and the other thing is to go to a war, which unfortunately I don't subscribe to that idea that Americans are sons of Mars and Europeans are sons of Venus. Bullocks. We did 5,000 years of wars on our own soil. So stop that argument. We learned the very hard way, what is a war. But yes, there is a possibility of another world war. It would be the fourth after what we call the Cold War for us, but for the rest of the world, it was the Third World War. So how do you manage that transition? And it's not just the United States. You need the collaboration, of other countries, of other powers, no matter how, unpalatable they might be. In the end, we did a Second World War with good Joe Stalin, who wasn't really, a shining example of democracy. I suspect he was even slightly less democratic than the Iranians. So I have this worry and this hope that after this night, no matter who wins, we have to think really, in a hard way, how to face a new world, which is not just defined by a pandemic. Frankly, the pandemic is a serious problem, but it's manageable. But the political risk associated with the pandemic is really a serious thing. And the possibility of a great economic depression is something that, yes, indeed, keeps me awake at night. Unfortunately, sometimes politicians are like, wine crops. There are years where they are good and years where they are a bit less, tasty, but we have to do with what we have. I wish really good luck to our American friends. I don't want really, a sort of worse repetition of what happened already with Al Gore.
Yeah.
Which was solved with a great, institutional responsibility. As an Italian, I have plenty of examples of that, thanks to the Christian Democrats, and also thanks to the Italian communists, who were a bit different. I'm not a communist, but I come from the Cold War, unfortunately, so I never saw them directly. So I think we have, of course, to hope and to discuss about the details of this night, but we have to think ahead, because this is a world which is completely different from the Washington consensus. I personally, for what might be interesting as a suggestion, think about a flexible globalization where different powers rewrite the rules together instead of having only one, a few, few countries writing them. It is, of course, a matter of compromise, but I think it is better jaw than war. Yeah. With that, I leave it up to you.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. And I'll just make a very brief comment. There's a question to be added. If Trump does lose this election and he's a one-term president, he enters a previous club of one-term presidents. I think the last one was H.W. Bush, before that Jimmy Carter. Trump is anything but traditional. Will he, in traditional presidential fashion, start a Trump center, or perhaps his own version of to showcase his legacy to be mooted? He potentially could start a television network. Maybe that will be Trump's. That will act as the Trump center. So
it will be a Trumpusconi.
A Trumpusconi. I will now invite Keith Boyfield, who's joined us, to make his contribution. Keith sits on our steering committee here at EGIC and is a friend of the organization. Keith, the floor is yours.
I'll try and be brief. Greetings from London. When I see the two presidential candidates on television, neither of them look in particularly good health. And I wanted to ask the panel for their views on the vice presidential candidates, because it may well be that over the course of 4 years, one of them might end up becoming president. And you've also got to bear in mind, unfortunately, the assassination or possibilities to do with one of the presidential candidates, for example, having a stroke, and how the vice presidents would then have to take on the role of president. So could I tempt our panel to talk about how either of those vice presidential candidates might influence future foreign policy and how it might differ from the presidential candidats?
I'll ask Spence maybe to kick off discussion on that point, Spence.
Well, now that it's in the optic of how their foreign affairs policies might be different, I mean, Kamala Harris is, of course, I think at the end of the day, a Democratic insider, and I think that she would rely on the foreign policy, the blob, I think, as it was described, the foreign policy bureaucracy that's in the United States right now, that is alive and out in the wilderness on the Democratic side. Now, with Pence, I just don't have the slightest idea. He's a bit of a cipher. I'm not sure exactly where he comes from, but I'm sure I would, again, hew towards more, basically, I think any person who is not Donald J. Trump is going to be more predictable and more consistent. And I think maybe I should just stop right there.
David, would you like to?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think Kamala Harris is very impressive. I think she's got a quickness of mind. She's got a great presence. She's a woman of colour. I think, you know, she could well be a very strong presidential candidate next time around. Obviously, one, you know, President Biden or Trump wins, you know, one wishes them well and they get through the term. But you know, she is definitely one to watch, whether taking over in the short term or standing in the future. I don't know much about Mike Pence. I think he's a good, solid guy, but I would like to comment on that. But I do think Kamala Harris would be a new generation and, you know, and a great asset to the Democrats for the future.
Dick, would you like to?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. If you think about it, we've all said that we're not really sure where Mike Pence would be. And he has been vice president for 4 years. It is really quite bizarre. I was waiting for William to tell us, to say he must know what's going on in this guy's head. I think that William's analysis, I actually would think that Kamala Harris will go back to the foreign affairs establishment. I don't think that would be an issue. I would differ a little bit from David on this. I have a funny feeling about Kamala Harris that American women might respond to her in something the same way that they responded to Hillary Clinton. She is undoubtedly very capable. David and Matthew know a little bit about my background. I was chairman of the Justice and Peace Commission here in Ireland for a time as a human rights fellow in the United Nations. I'm not a fan of her reported history from the period when she was Attorney General. That's a bit unfair, I know, but I think there are issues there that could cause problems. She's undoubtedly a very capable person, but she also has a very sharp tongue, which could get her into some difficulties. So I think it would be fascinating. But again, William and David, I mean, the anger that's there in American politics, the assassination word has never been far from my consciousness. I remember as a student the night getting the story in my class. I was doing a maths tuition. When the word came in, a man walked in and just shouted, "The president has been shot." And we all knew exactly what he meant. Hopefully America doesn't ever see that again. I mean, Reagan was very lucky, but given the anger, the ire, this terribly poisonous, rancorous element there, it would be one of my concerns. I have to say, I mean, I'm Irish. I like Biden, but I'm not impressed by his lack of energy. That's the most charitable way I can put it. So obviously every Irish person likes to see another Irish person in the White House, but I have little doubts at the back of my mind. I remember saying in 2006, I was doing a television thing, isn't it amazing that America couldn't get two different candidates? And I feel the same today. But hopefully, I mean, after this extraordinary display of the American voters and citizens' trust in the democratic process, that today will mark the beginning of a new phase. I really hope.
Marcel?
So I think just to talk about the Kamala, I think Kamala she's a prosecutor. If you look back and you see what she's done, she is very much a law and order type of leader. Now, I have no idea what her foreign policy positions are, but I can tell you that from my understanding of how the Democrats, in terms of the way that they're running their party, especially under Nancy Pelosi, I could see that she would be a very pragmatic leader that would fall back to really relying on the capable people at the State Department. We've got an incredibly intelligent and capable group of individuals that run our State Department here in the United States, and I think that some of that has suffered under Trump because there was a lack of very precise direction, as there was under Obama. I didn't totally agree with Obama's positions. I was, at the time I was a Republican. I've hence switched over to the Democratic side, but my whole really, my vision of what and my understanding of what Kamala Harris would do is she would really delegate to those really intelligent people to make the right decisions and ultimately to give her the right intelligence information so that she can make those right decisions. And I think that is going to be a step back from what Trump campaign has done and Trump's administration, because Trump's administration has been incredibly silent on what the objectives were, and things have come out very haphazardly. And State Department, follows what guidance they're given, and they weren't, I don't think, given as direct and clear, concise strategies as under the Obama administration. So I think you would see a fallback to how the State Department was run under the Obama administration. I think we would see the same thing under Kamala Harris or Biden. But I think Biden would be, is definitely going to be a more pragmatic leader. And I think that Kamala Harris would be more of a law and order type leader. Either way, I think the United States needs that more than kind of the cowboy leadership that we have today, especially during a pandemic when people really need specific guidance when it comes to COVID. So that's kind of my position on it.
Thank you, Marcel. I would say on Kamala Harris, I think win or lose for Joe Biden this evening, one has to presume that Kamala Harris is the Democratic front runner in 4 years, and that puts a significant amount of weight on her shoulder, and does, as the panelists have pointed out, it does beg the question what her position is on a raft of foreign policy issues. She's been well grilled and versed in the primary debates on domestic issues. Her credentials on law and order are well established as former Attorney General of California. But a raft of her views as it relates to foreign policy, to the Middle East, and to the Gulf region in particular, are somewhat unknown. And if she is elevated to the position of Vice President, I think we'll be hearing a lot more from her. And in the position she doesn't have that opportunity, I think we'll be hearing a lot more from her in that position as well. I'd like to bring in a question from Michael Greaves, who served as an international criminal lawyer in the war crimes trials in the Balkans, and also served as a legal advisor to Nigel Farage in the European Parliament. It ties in what we kicked off the conversation with on high levels of turnout. And Michael asked the question, what does the panel think the reasons are for that? And I would like to build on Michael's question. Further to that, what does it say for the democratic process and the electoral college if Biden were to win the popular vote tonight, potentially by a larger margin than Hillary Clinton by, say, 5-6 million votes, and still lose the electoral college? Where does that leave the US in the years to come after that? Surely that could sow the seeds for potential further division. But if we can dig in a bit on Michael's question, I'm happy to give David the floor.
Yes, thank you. I mean, hi, Michael. It's great to see you. I hope you're well. Turnout. This is fascinating to me about this election is the level of turnout. And the question I ask, I saw huge turnout in the Brexit referendum, as well you'll know, and in the Scottish referendum I was involved with as well. And it's that quiet Trump voter. The question I ask is, are these quiet Trump voters coming out? What's the passion that's driving them to vote this time? Is it lots of Democrats because they really hate Trump and they've got to get rid of him? This is a big opportunity. Or is it Trump supporters coming out, who are the quiet ones, thinking, he is our voice. I mean, he said that to him, I am your voice. And desperate to hold on to him, realizing, he's well behind in the polls, and they need his support. I mean, I think what is significant, by the way, is Trump has been saying for a long time, if you track back what he's been saying, he's saying, come out and vote. He wants people to come out and vote, not in mail, obviously, we've discussed that. But he's been driving that vote, come out and vote in person. And it seems to work. This is the guy that is recovered from COVID incredibly in a few days, and he's campaigning everywhere, and there's mass turnouts. And he's got the momentum at the moment. So I'm unclear, what these huge numbers are, why they're turning out. I don't think it's because of Biden. I call him basement Biden, because, he seemed to run the campaign from the basement. And he hasn't been campaigning, and some of those visuals are extraordinary, of people sitting in white circles. I thought it was like something out of a science fiction type movie, But there's certainly not that feeling of, is he motivating large numbers to come out, or is it really secret Trump voters coming out who are certainly motivated? And I think that is the crux of who's going to win tonight, is who is motivated and why are they coming out, is going to determine whether it could be a big result either way. And this is what's so extraordinary about tonight's election.
Could I possibly cut in there? I mean, you have two passions. You have fear and loathing on the one hand, and you have this fanatical support on the other hand. I mean, I still think there are probably a lot of shy Trumpers around, but the vigor on the Democratic side to finish this period is extraordinary. But one of the things that it does demonstrate, this turnout demonstrates, is that people will come out to vote when they have a reason to come out to vote, whether it's because they loathe one person or because they're fanatical in support of one person. And if you actually look at it, it's really very interesting from the point of view of democracy. Where do you continuously have people turning out about 30 and 40% to vote? Switzerland, because they never bother. There's not a big contest. There's not the passion. I would much prefer to see the passion and to see people coming out and owning it and saying, I'm going to bloody vote. If I have to walk across hot coals, if I have to swim the channel, I'm going to vote because I feel something about it. So in that sense, America is winning. There's this extraordinary realization that we can make a difference on either side. And the winners at the end of that will be democracy, because a lot of the debate about voting systems and all the rest of it is frankly administrative academic BS. What really counts is real politics. And what we're seeing is real bare knuckle politics. And hopefully, and going back to the point that Marcel was making, I hope to God it's not going to end up with the lawyers fighting it out. But it's energizing to look at 100 million people or 90 million people turning out for advanced voting. Actually, if I saw that in my country, I'd be very pleased. But I want to just give you, I want to really rub salt into poor David's wound now. I remember in the first Nice Treaty referendum, I was responsible for it. I wasn't responsible for the first Nice Treaty referendum. We had a really pathetic turnout because everybody assumed the people who are going to vote in favor of the Nice Treaty. And the people who are passionate about taking back control went out and voted against it. And then the Prime Minister of the Taoiseach phoned me and said, we're going to have a second referendum, and you're going to be the minister in charge. And I said, well, thank you very much. I'd be assassinated. But I mean, I did manage to get out and get another 500,000 people to come out and vote in the second referendum. Now, David has always pointed out that it was very undemocratic to have a second referendum. But, you know, when circumstances change, people change their mind. But, you know, when people have a reason to vote, and this is why politics and politicians have to get off the sort of looking always for the bland banalities and not offending anybody. You actually have to get out there and re-energize it. And I'm pleased that that's happening.
I have to share a text I just received from my son on my phone about 20 minutes ago, who wrote, Ted Cruz, arch conservative Republican senator from Texas, with the quote of the day so far: Democrats will crawl over broken glass to see Trump voted out. And I'll speak intemperately here for the moment, which is, I know a lot of this is purely anecdotal, but I know a lot of people just standing up and saying, this is the one chance I'm going to have to actually speak my mind about Donald Trump. And people are really, it's a visceral thing. And I think that explains a lot of the turnout. Trump also, for the record, has never really tried to reach beyond his own base. And so, you know, he's not reaching out to these people. And instead, what you have is a president who's never had majority support of over 50% of the country ever in his entire tenure. And now you also have Joe Biden, who's polling at above 50%. When you're above 50, that means there are no undecideds. The undecideds have all cast their ballot, and he has 50% plus one. And so it's a zero thing for Trump. And I'm laying it on the people are pretty angry about the way this country has been operating, and it's all over the country. It's palpable.
William, could I ask William a question? Sorry to be rude, Nasser. It's not entirely because of the mishandling of COVID. It's
not entirely, no. I mean, it's basically what I think Obama is the one who said, you know, you wouldn't have your high school principal behave this way. If he was your uncle, you would talk to him about it. People just want to have a normal life where this guy is out of Twitter for a few days. They want to have, you know, the trains run on time. They want to get on with their lives, and people are just exhausted.
I totally agree. Out of everything that's happened throughout these past 4 years, everything boils down to really, you know, the Democrats are all together for the most part. You probably have 90% of the Democrats are going to vote for Biden just because they want to see Trump get out of office. You then have the Republican bloc, which is actually it's a bit broken up. You've got your far right that will vote Republican regardless. You've got your Trumpers that 100% are behind Trump, and their main issues are smaller government. They want smaller government, and they want to see. They're very passionate about being able to go out and do what they want with their businesses, how they wish. And this is a very, very important point, because then you move over to the last group that is really probably the most pivotal in this election, which we, working for Bloomberg, have gone after wholeheartedly, trying to convince that 10% of Republicans that are centrist Republicans, they are fiscally conservative. They're mostly, you know, small business owners, or they're single entity LLCs. And at the same time, they are also socially liberal. This is my point, my viewpoint. And when you look at that 10%, it's that 10% that will decide this election, really. You know, all of the people to the right of that 10% on the Republican side will vote Republican. They'll vote Republican, you know, for the most part, because they are Republicans. They were born Republicans. They are into small government. They do not want higher taxation. They want the least amount of government intervention in anything, even when it comes to COVID. That centrist 10% of Republicans is what the Democrats now are trying to get. And if they can get that 10%, Biden's going to win the election. And this election is different than some of the other elections because in the past, people have voted split electorate. They have, voted for let's say a Democratic president and then maybe a Republican commissioner or a Republican auditor or treasurer. A lot of times it splits up, but this election is so divisive that people are voting straight ticket almost everywhere. So you're going to get whoever's going to vote for Biden is going to vote for Dems all the way down. And whoever votes for Republican is going to vote Republican all the way down. So this is really what's going to happen. Those are the issues that are driving people to the polls. And the same way that you're getting these Trump trains where these people are coming out and they're getting these whole huge boat rides with American flags and Trump supporters, and they're trying to get out and get other people to vote Trump. You've seen a huge raise in that. You've seen a lot of support for that. At the same time, you're also seeing a lot of support for Biden, but it's literally an anti-Trump vote. It's the same that you saw for the anti-Hillary vote that ended up getting Donald Trump in power. And it's like a swinging pendulum that's already swung over. And I think we're going to see another pendulum back to the blue side this time.
Thank you, Marcel. Just a bit of housekeeping. We still have a couple live questions, so we'll keep the conversation going for now. We'll extend it maybe by about 15 minutes or so if everyone's happy with that. There's two questions I'd like to sign first, and I'd like to bring in Spence and David on this one. Because of the lack of presidential debates in the cycle, I think we are one debate shy in the middle of the campaign. There was a lack of discussion on foreign policy. We touched on it a bit as it relates to what potentially a Kamala Harris vice presidency would bring to that. But I wonder if firstly Spence and David could build on what would a Trump second term versus a Biden first term mean for peace in the Middle East, further to building on the normalization process between Israel and Bahrain, the Emirates, and North Sudan, in addition to Trump's ambition of scaling back the American military presence in Iraq, and even an attempt to bring the Taliban back to the table in Afghanistan for peace negotiations. So there's a lot to throw in there, but I'd be remiss if we didn't briefly dig into that. So I'll give the floor to Spence to weigh in on that, and then I'll give the floor to David.
Well, as far as the Middle East is concerned, with Trump, again, you're not going to have much consistency. I think that everyone likes the normalization process, even Joe Biden. Joe Biden has indicated that he is not going to move the embassy out of Jerusalem. But at the same time, too, there is a lot of deep-seated resentment about Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli government right now within the Democratic Party. Netanyahu has been so overtly for Trump in so many different ways. He's kind of made his bed, and people are wondering how that's actually going to turn out. And it gets back to sort of this existential question about Israel with the United States, which is, do you like the government? How much of American feelings about Israel are tied to disappointment with Netanyahu, and whether U.S. overall support is overall diminished? I mean, that's what people say: long and deep damage. And I think that He still wants to pursue a two-state solution. He believes that the Palestinians need to have a place at the table, but at the same time, too, he wants to be even-handed. When you go to Iraq and by extension Syria, I'll be blunt. I think what we have with both of them is a mixed record. Biden is, of course, famous, if not notorious, for the so-called Biden plan, which broke up Iraq in 2007 into a Sunni region, a Shia region, and a Kurdish region. And people still feel that in Iraq these days. He's worked very closely on Iraqi issues, and I know that he would want to keep the troops there. When Trump pulled the U.S. forces out of Syria after the military campaign of the Turks, Biden, accused Trump of abandoning our Kurdish allies, and so I do think that he is probably going to be. I don't know. I think he's going to be probably pretty much a status quo candidate on here. There's really not much on the radar, and being quite blunt, I don't think he has much to show for in Iraq after years. I mean, he knows everybody. He's really put his heart and soul into Iraq, but it's definitely a mixed message. I think on Turkey, I think there's going to be a lot of backdraft on Turkey, and I mean, he's called for domestic support for domestic opposition to Erdogan, for example. And he's, talked about Turkish expansionism across the region. And of course, the Turkish purchase of Russian anti-aircraft missiles is a sanctions issue waiting to happen in the United States Senate, especially if the Senate goes Democratic. And then finally, I think with the Biden administration, human rights is going to be back on the agenda, and that is the Saudi Arabian government, that's the Emirates, that's Egypt, and it is Turkey. And at a minimum, should Biden take power, at a minimum, you're just going to see fewer official visits and less weapons, sort of the day-to-day business of American foreign policy in the Middle East is going to be very muffled. Two final comments. Sorry, I said it was final, but I lied. One thing is that the Middle East is not going to be a high priority. I mean, this guy has a massive, immense domestic agenda that he needs to implement. And again, he has to deal with COVID-19. This is going to be a very large thing. He has to kickstart the economy. And he has a lot on his plate right now, but especially when we consider that our whole relationship with China is going to need to be sorted out. Our relationship to NATO and alliances and international tools like the World Health Organization, which Trump withdrew us from. All of this is going to be all on the plate for a President Biden. And so I don't really expect to see very much real focus on the Middle East. I could talk winners and losers. I mean, the Saudis, our MBS is probably not going to be very happy if Joe Biden is president. But like I said, I want to go back to the fundamental point about the Biden potential foreign policy, and that is what he offers is policy consistency against the unpredictability of a Trump administration. And I guarantee it will mean more consultation with allies and care and feeding and international networks like the World Health Organization or the Paris Climate Accords. So I think that's pretty much a given. I'm not sure where the Middle East is going to fit in at the end of the day.
David, you served as chairman of the Iraq delegation in the European Parliament. You have a little bit of experience in the region.
Yes, I mean, obviously in that role, I had to, I learned a lot about Middle Eastern policy in the wider context, because obviously Iraq is affected by a lot of players all around it, including Iran and obviously Turkey in the northern parts, etc. Yeah, I mean, I'm querying whether, in broad terms, and by the way, thanks, great to see you, Spence, and thanks for Washington, all you did, a great welcome in Washington. The question I ask is, will Biden be more interventionist than Trump? Because there is a slight sort of bizarre side to Trump where he prefers to be the peacemaker than actually to take military action. I mean, we touched on the Taliban, the deal with the Taliban. I think there was shameful on the Kurdish side, putting out support for Kurds. I think they've been badly treated. There's more complex issues of the Syrian Kurds and the Turkish Kurds. The Iraqi Kurds, I know well. We went to Erbil, and I was with the Peshmerga on the front line against ISIS-controlled Mosul, and we really need to thank them for their incredible sacrifice. Really many women fighting on there. But you know, will Biden be more interventionist? Because it's one of these peculiar things. Sometimes right-wingers, they can be sort of come across like Trump as being pretty hard line, put America first. But does putting America first mean not actually sacrificing so many troops abroad? You know, he's probably less interested in that. He's more interested in doing a deal with North Korea, or I mean, he can criticize China and you can have a trade war, but what's he done over Hong Kong and the shameful treatment of democratic protesters? So I pose that as a question. I think the other interesting thing is how, as long as I've known, the Democrats have been very close to the Jewish lobby. And here you have Trump, you know, having an awful lot of support from the Jewish lobby, the pro-Israel people. You know, it's quite interesting how he's sort of taken on that mantle, you know, and prioritizing Israel, or that's what he's saying he's doing, moving the embassy, you know, and he will get a lot of support today as a result of that. The third point, I think, is more about the EU. I've touched on it. Biden is, I think, just more in tune with the European Union in terms of, as I say, climate change. China's an interesting one. You know, the EU is very, I think, quite an appeaser of a lot of these countries. And, you know, there's allegations of Biden's involvement with China deals that's come out of this election. I don't know. It's interesting, but as I say, the wider question is, as Spencer's touched on, Biden's wanting to keep troops in Iraq, and that's more of an indicator of more interventionist stance. And certainly Blair, I know from the left wing, was actually one of the most interventionist prime ministers Britain had. You know, the Iraq War being a case in point. So I query that, you know, whether that will actually lead. But of course, there hasn't been much debate in these presidential debates about foreign policy. It's almost been ignored. So I don't know what voters are basing their choice on. But it's obviously domestic issues always take priority anyway. But foreign policy really hasn't come into this very much. But it's going to be a very interesting position. But I think the EU side, from my point of view, I think it would be more of a corporatist approach, a joint US-EU corporatist approach, and so quite shared policies if Biden wins.
And just because we're short on time, I'm going to ask Dick also to weigh into that subject, but I'm going to, in advance, put another question to Marcel, if you wouldn't mind asking after. It comes from, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Anna Fontana, Colombia alum, 2012. And her question is quite straightforward, so maybe Marcel can shed some light on it after Dick's remarks, is how do you think the elections will impact the stock market? Sort of direct to the point. So first, Dick can also weigh in on that if he wants as well, but the floor is yours if you want to weigh in on the foreign policy ramifications as well. Dick.
I forgot to unmute. On the stock market, one thing about the stock market is it never loses. in the long term. On the foreign policy, there was a very interesting, I don't know if you read this, David, there's a very interesting op-ed or editorial piece in Your Active last week, very interesting, about whether a Trump victory or a Biden victory would be better for Europe. And it was quite a surprising editorial. Georgi Gotchev, good friend of mine, and a good friend of yours too, David, wrote it. But he actually said he had mixed feelings about it, and his feeling was that Trump is the disruptive character, but Biden would actually go back to the more traditional relationship between a sort of a corporate relationship between the bureaucrats in the Commission and the bureaucrats in Foggy Bottom. And it was a very interesting take because, of course, Europe would slip back into its old comfortable relationship. Now, it depends on what side of the story you're on, whether you look at that as good, bad, or indifferent. Myself and David would disagree in this because I like Europe to stand on its own feet a bit more and to take its responsibilities a bit more. One thing I just wanted to mention, and it was when we were talking about the Middle East, we didn't talk an awful lot about Iran. I have a big personal interest in Iran. I've been out there a couple of times. I see the suffering of the people there. I have a really bad feeling about how we in the West have actually driven the decent people over to the more militants over there. And I'm just wondering, would Biden have a different view there? Anyway, on the stock exchange, they'll take a bump and they'll get over it. On foreign policy, I still don't quite know where it's going to go.
Marcel?
I would say for the stock market, as Warren Buffett would say, never bet against America. The stock market, it goes up and down, always does. It'll shift based on whether Trump or whether Biden wins. You're going to have some slight shifting. Obviously, there's going to be some major political implications that are going to affect the stock market. You're going to have obviously a shift back to some more social ideals in terms of healthcare. I think you're going to have the market is going to continue to go up. You're going to continue to see bumps, but I think the biggest raise in the stock market is going to happen right after the election. If Biden ends up taking office, you're going to see once the new package is released for stimulus for businesses, and you're going to see also, I think, a much larger package that will be delivered to citizens that are either unemployed or underemployed. You're going to start to see a lot of that liquidity hit the market. When that liquidity hits the market, you're going to see another spike in the stock market. And if you take a look at what the volumes were, it is fascinating. In America, which is the largest stock market in the world, I mean, just looking at our tech, we are bigger than the entire, our top, I think, 10 technology companies are larger than the entire stock markets of all of Europe put together. If you look at the volumes, the trading volumes that happened right after the crash of the stock market back in March, you see that trading volumes have tripled. So it's something incredible, but that is not all Trump's fault. It is really, it is the US government's fault, because we ended up giving an enormous shot of liquidity into the market. And that directly went into people sitting at home and doing day trading and investing in stocks. It's something that didn't happen anywhere else in the world. And it's something that, again, don't bet against the American stock market, because it will continue going up.
Thanks a lot for that, Marcel. We'll start to wrap up now. I'll just make some brief observations. I mean, we try to cover as much as we can. I mean, there's a few topics that come to mind that we didn't get to. in detail. The Supreme Court, Trump was incredibly fortunate in one term being able to put 3 people on the U.S. Supreme Court. But win or lose, his legacy on the highest court of the land in the U.S. will be profound, and obviously that asks a serious question as to what hypothetical Biden administration would do the Supreme Court. I know he's proposed establishing a commission that could look on some FDR-style court packing. I'm sure the congressional Republicans will have a thing or two to say about that if that comes to light. To wrap up, I'd like to really put our panelists in very briefly, just on right on the hot seat, and ask for a prediction in 10 seconds how they think tonight or the weeks will roll out, and do they see another four more years for Donald Trump, or do they see a Biden-Harris administration? I'll start with Marcel in 10 seconds. What's your pick?
I think Biden wins slightly on the presidential, and I think you'll see the House stay blue and pick up a few seats, and I think you'll also see the Senate. I think the Senate will probably pick up a few seats, but it won't go to the majority. I think it'll stay Republican majority, and then I think you'll see a lot of the House seats for states and the House and the Senate seats for states around the country. I see them going more blue.
David, what's your
Yeah, this is the hot seat time. I know this could go either way, but I'm going to say 330 Trump. I think he's going to win. I think he's going to be a really surprise. The guy is full of surprises, and I was there in 2016. He shouldn't have won that. I know the polls are against him, but I think something is going on here, and just in the way people are behaving and acting, and there's a lot of energy there, and it could turn into numbers.
Dick?
Biden will have a massive support in the popular vote. In the electoral college, it'll be very closer. And every instinct tells me Trump can't win, but I wouldn't be surprised if he squeaked over the corner. I was actually saying to somebody on a program earlier on today, the lobster boat in Maine could be very, very important in this presidential election. Could I ask 2 questions very quickly? First and foremost, if it weren't for COVID, would Trump have a walkover? And number 2, did big tech actually shift this election? Sorry to throw those 2 out there.
So they're very good questions. And I'll now for the final pick, I'll give the floor to Spence, quite soon, considering you're right there on the ground in Washington, DC. What do you think, Spence?
Well, the first thing is that I think we just all have to hang on here. And again, it's going to be a cliffhanger, but I do believe that Biden will win. I do think that the voting in advance has really shifted things in Biden's favor. I think the Senate is going to come out 50 seats or 51 seats Democratic. Of course, if Biden wins, and that gives Kamala Harris the deciding vote in the Senate, so that would be effectively a Democratic majority. On the House side, I think there could be as many as a 10 to 18 seat Democratic pickup. And again, I want to echo Marcel's comments about the state houses. This is a year for the census, and the legislatures that are being elected today are the same ones who will be doing all the districting for each state in the next few years. So those legislature results are going to be absolutely critical for the long term of both parties. So and finally, my final thing. Watch Texas, you guys, the Lone Star State.
I think Texas is a real interesting one. I would have been curious to see Beto O'Rourke put his name on the ballot again for Senate. I think he could have potentially picked up a picked up a seat for the Democrats if he had thrown his hat into the ring there.
People are just absolutely dumbstruck right now.
And for me personally, I think my pick is, I think it'll be of course, a popular vote win for Biden. And I think he'll squeak it on the electoral college, but I think it's going to be close. I just struggle to see how Trump can overcome the huge increase in turnout in early voting. And on that note, I'd really like to thank our co-host for this event, Selby, the president of the Colombia Alumni Association. Thank you so much for letting us share this conversation with your network and your friends. I'd like to thank our team here at the EuroGulf Information Center. I'd like to thank Veronica for all her help, Martina, Arnold for all of their support as well. I'd like to thank our president, Mitchell Belfer. And of course, I'd like to thank our panelists and our speakers, Spence, Dick, Marcel, and of course, the one and only DCB. I think we've had a really interesting conversation. We could have kept talking for hours. We're well over time as it is, and I will let Selby conclude on one final point. Selby? Yeah, you can see. You can see.
Thank you for panelists and our host, EuroGulf Information Center, and for actually organizing this event from beginning till the end. And actually, thank you so much for our alumni, Diana Wade, Sarah Anna Faulkner, for your questions and actually staying that long. So I know, like I got all your text messages. And please don't leave. As promised, we will keep doing our networking right after this event, turning off recording.
Yes.
And
Yeah, and that concludes the formal discussion. Please feel free to stay on the call if you wish to network with some of our esteemed Columbia alumni. But that ends the main part of our discussion. And thank you all for joining. And please stay safe in these difficult and bizarre times. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to be on the panel.
Yeah, and as we say, Ihoa, good night. Kolosov, sweet dreams.
Goodness.
Tomorrow morning will come round really fast. Cheers, everybody. Launcher.
Sir? Yeah.
so
Yeah, you could get them.
no, we're fine.
Yeah.
As long as we are not turning off recording.
No, we'll keep them.
Recording.
Yeah.
For networking.
Okay. Yeah.